Hello, everyone. Welcome to another growth chat by Mail Modo. Today we have a very special guest, Lauren Meyer, who is the CMO of Socketlabs and who I have been following for last 2 years to learn about everything about email marketing and strategy. She has been working for last 20 years to improve and spread learnings about email marketing among the marketers. She has been working at companies like Epsilon, Mailjet, Kickbox, and now at Socketlabs. So welcome, Lauren. How are you doing today?
Thanks for having me. I'm great. How are you?
I'm good, and I'm very thankful for you for you to be here in this growth chat. And like I mentioned, I have been seeing your post on LinkedIn and Email Geeks community, and I have been learning a lot myself. So, how has been your journey begin, and how did you decide that you want to go get into email marketing?
Yeah, so I think like a lot of people, I sort of just fell into it. It was kind of like, oh, well, that's a job that I think I can do, and I kind of just jumped into an affiliate marketing company, and I spent about 4 years at that first company. But then from there, it was just every job that I had was through a connection from somebody at my previous job. So my second job was somebody who left the first company and started their own company. So that was like, I was the fifth person hired in a small affiliate marketing company. From there, then a friend of mine offered a job to me at Epsilon and said, hey, like, how about you come over to this side of email and help us send email for the top retailers and the top financial brands in the world. And from there, then I moved to Mailjet, which I think was one of those, like all of the experiences that I had throughout my career, like, starting in affiliate marketing, especially that second role that I had, I was basically sending, campaigns from all of the different ESPs that pretty much existed at the time. So I got really used to all of the different interfaces, what matters for hitting the inbox. Like, it's like, oh gosh, we're sending that mail and our open rate at Gmail is 1%. Like clearly we're probably going to the spam folder there. So I think it was a really good learning experience. And then that's when I switched to Epsilon and was dealing with these really big clients. I realized that they have the same kind of deliverability issues that I was having trying to send payday loans mail or any kind of affiliate marketing mail that I was sending, right? So I think it was really cool for me to just sort of see that the way to hit the inbox truly was doing right by your recipients and kind of having those best practices and really just, getting permission, doing all the right things, and then delivering a really good email experience. And so I think that was really nice to see that even those, really well-known brands that you would assume are hitting the inbox, if they're not doing right by email, they're going to the spam folder too, or they're getting blocked, or they're getting listed on Spam House. So that was kind of fun. And then when I did switch to Mailjet, the role that I went for was more of a compliance role. So I was the VP of delivery, but it was, I was doing anti-abuse, I was doing compliance, I was doing industry relations and deliverability. And so my team was tasked with keeping the platform clean from spammers, trying to make sure all of our shared pools were in tip-top working order and hitting the inbox. We had dedicated IP customers. So it was kind of like across the board, just like all of the issues that you have with like a self-service sign-up model. So I learned a ton. I got to travel a lot. I went to a bunch of conferences, and that's where I met even more people in the industry. So it was like a really cool experience to then go to these events where you're actually talking to a competitor, but they're sharing secrets. It's not trade secrets, but you're solving abuse issues together. You're saying, yeah, I've seen that same thing at my platform. Here's what we did and it worked. And so you're sharing this information. You're kind of building those relationships. So that was really fun. And then when Mailjet was acquired by Mailgun, it was kind of, it's one of those, there's a lot of turnover, a lot of things change in a company when it gets acquired sometimes. So from there, I moved on to Kickbox, and I was actually lucky enough to kind of help them launch their deliverability monitoring service. So that was really fun because I got to get into like the product development and work with our dev team to kind of, fix certain aspects of reporting to make it very specific, or, add context, or just to make the product better. And then do a bunch of industry relations there as well. And then now for the last year, I've been at Kickbox, and now I'm a full-on marketer. I'm the chief marketing officer, which is a pretty rare thing for somebody who's been in deliverability and compliance for most of their career. But I think that's where you have to remember that I am the CMO for an email service provider, right? Our company, Socketlabs, is an email delivery provider. We're very similar to like a Mailgun, a mail, let's say SendGrid or Spark Post, where it's just we're kind of focused on that last mile of delivery. And so I think that's where like I've lived there my whole career of just trying to help people go from hitting send. So whatever's happening upstream, like I know MailModo has really awesome tools for marketing automation and things to kind of make your emails even better. Once you hit send, that's when my job starts, right? And all of this complexity that goes back and forth between, you're talking to Gmail if you're sending to Gmail, and they're sending data back, and you're sending data back, and eventually the mail either goes to the inbox or the spam folder, or it gets blocked, right? And so I think that's something that I'm really passionate about and have been for many years, is just helping people hit the inbox and figuring out what's going wrong when they're not.
That's really an impressive experience, and like I haven't seen somebody so focused in email marketing and deliverability for such a long period of time, and working at these kind of ESPs like MailGen and Socketlabs. I think that your experience is already enriched. So, audience, say hi to Lauren in the comments and ask your questions. I will take your questions in between the chat as well, and at the end of the chat as well. So, Lauren, my first question that I get from a lot of people is, what is the difference between email delivery and deliverability?
Yes, and I'm glad we're starting here, because this is so important to the conversation we're having, because one of these things, the delivery rate, is something that you can actually measure, right? There's a calculation for this. Essentially it's determining when you hit send, did the message make it over to the mailbox provider's side of the fence, right? Did they accept it? Did they not reject your message? That's the delivery rate, and that's a standard calculation. But what we're here to talk about today is deliverability, which is kind of everything that comes after that point when you get a message that says the mail's been delivered. And so from there, there's all of these different anti-spam filters. Like, I almost think of this as like, there's like the checkpoints at the airport, right? Like, there's the first checkpoint that you go through. That's a big one. If you get in there, great, but you still need to behave yourself when you're waiting to get on your plane. You need to kind of do all these things. So there's all these kind of little checkpoints, right? If you buy something at the newsstand, they ask for your ticket at the airport, right? So I think that, if you can think of it sort of like that, email deliverability is kind of all of those little hurdles, those little spam filters that are being checked. So it's like, okay, cool, you're good enough to let in the door, but do we actually want your mail to go to the spam folder? And so that's really what deliverability is that part that's really hard. There is no standard calculation. There's no way to measure it. A lot of companies have come up with their own calculation for what the deliverability rating or score might be, but that's based on what they think it should be, right? There's so many factors. There are hundreds of factors that go into whether you hit the inbox or not. And so deliverability is essentially trying to boil all of those things down into this one pretty little number that's from 0 to 100. So it's very, very challenging, versus the delivery rate is very clear cut.
Yeah, so like you mentioned, like while measuring delivery rate is very easy, but measuring there's no metric to measure deliverability. But are there any proxy or are there any monitoring tools? Like is open rate is a proxy to better deliverability, or is engagement rate or any other metric that as a marketer one should monitor or measure to understand how their email deliverability is?
Yeah, and that's there are a lot of metrics. I think that's one of the beautiful things about email, is it's such a data-rich channel where you've got, your open rates, your click rates, all the way through the funnel, right? Unsubscribe rates, complaint rates, the bounce rate that starts at the top. But I think before we get into what metrics to monitor, I just quickly want to kind of touch upon recipient behavior, because this is what mailbox providers are mainly measuring when they're determining if your mail goes to the inbox or if it goes to the spam folder. Because email senders, we only have access to those few data points, right? The opens, the clicks, replies, unsubscribes. But mailbox providers are looking at a lot more information to try to figure out what their users are actually finding value in. So, becoming more focused on user engagement is going to really kind of help you. It's sort of like a proxy for how the mailbox providers look at that. So, just keep in mind that mailbox providers all have a really common goal for how they deliver the mail, right? They're really looking to surface the messages that are, first of all, safe for their users. And that's the important thing, because I think about 90 to sometimes 95% of the mail that's sent towards mailbox providers on any given day is hardcore, like malicious stuff, like not even just spam that's about Viagra or something like that. It's actual, malware and really scary stuff that recipients should never actually have to see. So you're trying to kind of deal with this last 5 to 10% of mail that looks legitimate, might be legitimate, and they're working off of all that information, right? So it's some of the ways that mailbox providers are gauging the positive and the negative signals. So the positive ones might be things like opening mails, clicking on links within those emails, replying. If you're saving emails to a folder, that's something that they're saying, oh, well, interesting. They like that mail. They want to save it for later. If you're starring a message as important, maybe if you're forwarding it on to friends or colleagues, if you're adding that sender to your address book, or a really big positive signal for mailbox providers is if you find a message in your spam folder or your junk folder and you say this is not spam, or you drag it out of that and back into your inbox. So that's saying, hey, mailbox provider, I think you got this wrong. I really like that mail, right? So all of that stuff is viewed positively by mailbox providers. And then they're also looking at negative forms of engagement. So figure spam complaints. They're looking at the bounce rates. So if you send to 100 people, how many of those messages are valid addresses versus invalid? So they're trying to gauge the quality of your sign up process. They're also looking at things like, do you get mail from certain senders that you never open or click or engage with in any way? Or maybe you just drag it to your trash folder, or you delete it as soon as you see it. So all of these things are little signals, but I would say by far the biggest one is that spam complaint rate. You'll notice that I didn't really mention unsubscribe rates in my list here, but that's because mailbox providers aren't looking at unsubscribe rates in the same way that we are, right? In a way, that's a good thing, right? If people want to unsubscribe, if they want to get off the list, let them get off the list. But essentially, that's mailbox providers are taking all this data and trying to figure out essentially what's going to make my recipient happy, right? If I'm a Yahoo user, what's going to make me stay at Yahoo and not take my email address over to Gmail because they don't want me to leave, right? So I think they're really doing the best to protect their users and to do that. So I think that's from our side as senders, we do want to look at all of the metrics that are available to us. So starting with that bounce rate, right? Are you sending to valid addresses or not? There's also another kind of bounce that's like we tend to call it a soft bounce, but essentially that's when a mailbox provider blocks you, right? So you might get a bounce message that says something like blocked due to policy, or blocked because it looks like spam, or something to that effect. And so they're not saying that the address doesn't exist. They're just saying, we're not going to let you deliver to it because we don't think that you're a good enough sender. We don't think that they actually want this mail. So so look at those bounce message, the bounce rates and your delivery rates. Open rates are a bit less accurate, let's say, than they used to be. And this is a much bigger topic, but if you haven't heard of Apple Mail Privacy Protection, go check that out because there's a lot of information about that. But essentially, it's making it harder for us to track opens and trace them back to specific recipient actions. So look at your opens, but look at them over time and just sort of gauge, am I about a 20% today? Am I about 5% tomorrow? Ooh, that means there's a problem there. So kind of just look at them as an arc in a way. Click rates are not really a deliverability metric because if people are clicking, that's proving that they've got the mail in their inbox probably, right? Or they found it in the junk folder. But click rates are a really good way to kind of identify if the mail is wanted by people, right? If they're clicking through, if they're engaging at higher levels, that's always a good sign, right? So look at that. Replies as well. I really don't like it when people use no reply addresses because you could be missing out on valid feedback from your users. But more importantly, replies are a really positive sign for mailbox providers when it comes to deliverability. So if you're letting people respond to you, that could give you this just littlest bit of a lift in terms of inbox placement. So look at that stuff. The unsubscribe rate, do look at that one because it tells you negative sentiment, right? That's telling you that person was about to hit the spam folder. And if you think about your own inbox, it's a lot easier to find the spam button than it usually is to find the unsubscribe link within the content of an email. So if somebody's unsubscribing and you see a certain campaign or a mail stream or type of content that has a little bit of a higher unsubscribe rate, even if your complaint rate's low, take that seriously because that is a sign that you're kind of upsetting certain people. They don't like the mail that you're sending. They're probably likely to mark as spam as well. And then, of course, check that spam complaint rate. That is definitely the most important to watch. Keep in mind, a little caveat here, not every mailbox provider gives you feedback loops for complaint rates. And Gmail is the biggest example here. So if I figure if you've got a list that is very heavily skewed towards Gmail, you're going to think your spam complaint rate is really low, but it's simply because you're sending a lot of messages and the overall rate looks low. So for the spam complaint rate, that's another one I would say, look at it at the destination level. So try to dig into places where you actually have a spam complaint feedback loop set up, right? So figure at Yahoo is a good example. They tell you who's marking as spam. Hotmail tells you who's marking as spam. So you can track those destinations to sort of get to that level of like, how am I doing? Because Gmail's not going to tell you if you have a spam complaint rate issue until it gets really, really bad. But there's signals there that you can look at to just kind of have a bigger picture. So I would say those are probably the metrics that I would focus on. And most of those are directly within your ESP or your mailing platform, which was really helpful.
Yeah. So just to summarize, to improve deliverability, we need to optimize for the how the recipient experiences it in their email and how they engage with it, and there are
Very.
positive responses and there are negative responses.
Mhm.
So positive responses include the opens, clicks, mark as important, and or move it to some folder or reply to it or forward it to it. Our negative ones would be to spam complaints, the most important ones, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So
Yep.
and Lauren, like one question here, like you mentioned that open rate could be there should be a time like sequence, like how it is fluctuating, right? But is there
Mhm.
any benchmark on bounce rate or other metrics like uh, reply rate, etc.? If you can track that, are there any metrics or the benchmarks on these metrics?
Yeah. I think in general, benchmarks are a little bit tricky because really the best person to compare yourself to is yourself. So I want to say that
Mm,
first of all. So figure it doesn't matter if that retail brand that you're competing with has a 30% open rate and yours is 20 or 25. Just try
mm,
to do a little bit better than you did yesterday. You don't have to match them. Eventually, you'll get there, but just try to find ways to improve
mm,
your own metrics. But I think that's
mm,
a couple of benchmarks I would say, like for bounce rates, for example,
mm,
try to keep those really truly below 1 to 2% if
mm,
possible.
mm,
Typically, there's certain mailbox providers that will start to sometimes block mail when you get to around that 2% point.
mm,
It gets pretty bad when you get to around the 4 or 5% bounce rate. So really try to keep those bounce rates as low as
mm,
possible. Again, below
mm,
2%, I would say.
mm,
Spam complaint rate is another one that you really want to be very aware of and mindful of. In this case, this is going to sound incredibly low, but I would really keep that below 0.02 or 0.03%. A
mm,
lot of mailbox providers, a lot of feedback that you get from ESPs will kind of shoot higher and they'll say, okay, we'll just keep it below 0.1%, which is still very low. I get it. All of these numbers are very, very tiny.
mm,
But that's where, again, you're not looking to avoid getting blocked by mailbox providers. You're looking to actually satisfy your audience, to give them mail that they prefer, and to over time really impress the mailbox providers and let them know that the mail is valued. And
mm,
so yeah, keep that spam complaint rate super low and look at the trends. Okay, if it, even if yours is 0.02% all the time, if there's
mm,
certain campaigns that then go to 0.04, 0.05, something like that, what's the reason why that's happening? Did you segment differently? Did you send content that was a little bit more aggressive, or maybe misleading in some way? You used free when it wasn't free, or maybe the subject line was just really vague and they just weren't
mm,
really sure what the mail was about, and then they opened it and they were annoyed, right? So like there's things that you can kind of just look into, but I would say those two are ones that you should have a benchmark for. But
mm,
open rates, click rates, even reply rates, I would say are very dependent on the industry, the type of mail you're sending. Is it transactional? Is it a marketing newsletter? Is it a sales offer? That's really going to affect the type of engagement that you get.
Yeah, that's very insightful actually. So, Lauren, you also mentioned that the first thing that the mailbox check is the safety of the email, like whether it is safe for the recipient. So
Yeah.
that brings to me to then my next question about DKIM, SPF, and DMARC authentications. So, can you, like, most of the people don't even know about these terms,
Yeah.
right? And so, can you explain about them in a simple terms so that our audience can also understand and how to
Yes,
make best
for
use of it?
sure. Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head. Authentication can get very technical very quickly. People who enjoy it still get a bit of like an ice cream headache when they're trying to figure out issues sometimes. So
Mm,
I would say for the audience, think of authentication in general, sort of like your passport or your driver's license or some other form of ID that tells mailbox providers and recipients exactly who you are, right? It's a way for them to kind of have a little bit more confidence in the fact that the mail is actually coming from you when it says it's you. So it's really important because this is something that builds trust with consumers and with the mailbox providers. So again, both of them are
mm,
trying to figure out, are you PayPal? You say that you're PayPal. Are you PayPal? Because that would be really bad if you're not PayPal, right? So
mm,
they're trying to build that trust, and they're also trying to provide protection from spoofing, from phishing, and from basically other bad actors trying to pretend to be you to kind of sort of steal your good sender reputation, your good brand reputation, and then use that to basically get someone to give away their login credentials for their bank or whatever else, right? So the point of authentication really is to limit the ability for bad actors to do that. And they can still do some bad stuff with authentication, even if it's in place, but it makes your domain less of a target because it's just, there's a lot more. Imagine it's like, oh, well, that house is wide open. The front door is open. I'm just going to go steal that stuff versus the one that's next door that's locked up and has a security system, right? So authentication is kind of like that. I would say, in 2022, which we're in, authenticate all of your emails. And if you're using an ESP and Mailmodo, I'm sure is helping you with this, they usually help you with the DKIM and SPF setup. So these are the main two types of authentication that you're going to want to have to worry about. Don't worry too much about what they are or how they work. Talk to your IT team, your security person, your support team at your ESP. If your security team is a little bit kind of like, oh, I'm not really sure what to do with this, because domain alignment is really important as well. So figure, I don't know if any of you have looked at the email headers, right? There's a way for you to kind of dig into all of the background noise that's there. And you'll notice that there's a lot of domains within those email headers, right? There's the actual from address that you're using. There's a from name. There's the domain that you're signing your DKIM with. There's the domain that you're signing your SPF with. There's all these different things. And you want them to look organized and kind of very in line so that when mailbox providers see it, and again, it's not, Steve at the mailbox provider side. It's a filter. It's a computer that's looking at this and trying to say, again, is this legitimate? Okay, well, this is a mess, right? And then they just don't want to deal with it or their system can't handle it. So it's really work with your IT team, work with your ESP, because in some cases there's a little bit of nuance to how you should set up those records. But a lot of those, and like Socketlabs, we have our own DKIM generator tool. So come onto our website. You know exactly what to do. There's a step-by-step kind of tutorial to get you there. So I think that's just don't try to be the master of authentication yourself unless you're super technical. I would really just say lean into the folks that you know in your world who can do that for you. It's a standard thing you got to do, but you don't want to overcomplicate things, right? So I think that's where, any questions you have, don't try to kind of just teach it to yourself. Just really get going. But yeah, I would say those two main forms you want to focus on are SPF and DKIM.
Yeah, so that's very insightful. Like, do it no matter what your IT team says, and it is going to save you from a lot of embarrassment.
Yeah, and I would almost, it's one of those, like, going back to my analogy from before. Like, imagine like the SPF. Well, we'll use one like it's kind of like SPF and DKIM. Like authentication is sort of the front, like the front door, right? If you're walking into a bar and there's a bouncer at the front door who's checking your ID, that's sort of like what authentication is. So that's that point where that's going to get you past that initial filter that lets the mail be delivered to the mailbox provider side, right? So authentication is not something that's really going to help with deliverability, but it helps with delivery in that sense, because it really is just the first, it's proving that you're legitimate.
Yeah. So another thing related to that is the domain itself, right? Like many people say that don't use your main domain for your marketing emails, right? So what are the things that we should consider while using a domain or subdomain, and what are the differences if we use a subdomain instead of a domain?
Yeah, and I think going back to that point I just made about being organized, I think this is one of those places where, to your point, you do not want to use your top level domain where your website is hosted for your sending, because all of it's connected, right? It's not the old days where you could kind of just have a really bad IP over here in a corner of the internet. Like, it's all, the machines are smart enough to connect the dots, right? So for domains, I always prefer to use subdomains, and this is how you can really get organized. So imagine if you have a transactional mail stream that's like password resets or purchase confirmations or something like that. You could have a subdomain that's, transactional.mailmodo.com, right? So that way that's separated. The mailbox providers can very clearly see and tell what kind of mail they should be expecting there. Let's say you also have a newsletter that you send to your customers. That could be newsletter.mailmodo.com or whatever else it is. And so you're sort of, if you think about it kind of like a house, right? You've got your kitchen, you've got the living room, you've got your bedroom and the bathroom. You're sort of just, you're laying everything out so that it's very clear for mailbox providers. And that's one aspect of this. I think sometimes what marketers tend to do is we get stuck behind the red tape, right? So especially if you work for a big company where getting anything approved, a subdomain created is going to take approvals and you have to go through legal or whatever else, you're going to say, well, let's just use like a lookalike domain, right? Instead of mailmodo.com, let's use mail-modo.com, right? And that's a terrible idea. And here's why, because it looks like you're trying to pretend to be you, but you're not actually you. Because if you think about it, if I'm Mailmodo, why wouldn't I just send from a Mailmodo domain? Why wouldn't I talk to my IT team and set that up? If I'm, it's sort of like if you're trying to circumvent your own policies, that starts to look suspicious to mailbox providers. But also imagine if you're a customer who happens to look at that domain and you're like, wait, but my platform that I send from is mailmodo.com. Why is this mail-modo? That's fish. I think that's fish. And so it's the level of trust that you can have with these kind of lookalike domains, or sometimes they're called like cousin domains. They really, the damage that can be done, because figure if you have recipients that are untrustworthy of that mail and they mark it as spam at a higher rate, or they mark it as fish, that is incredibly damaging to your sender reputation. So I think it's about the perception that you're giving to, again, the mailbox providers and your audience to really try to reinforce the trust that they can have in that mail being legitimately from you.
So your suggestion is basically to use subdomains instead of a completely new domain. But does any kind of spam complaints, etc., on a subdomain, can that affect the main domain?
It can. I think it's usually more localized to the subdomain that you're using. So figure if your spam complaint rates are a little high on the marketing side, that usually should not affect your transactional mail, because again, the mailbox providers can see that it's separate. They see that there's a higher level of engagement with your transactional mail than the marketing newsletters. But eventually, if you're doing enough bad things and you're kind of getting a red flag over here, a red flag over there, it all kind of just starts to bubble up and just get worse and worse.
So that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. And going forward, I want to ask more inside the email, like the content of the email, the subject line, the images, GIF, or the code itself, the HTML code itself. Does that affect the email deliverability anyhow? And if yes,
It
how
does.
can we put it? Okay.
Yeah. And I will say, I'll give my old company Kickbox a plug here, because they just very recently published a blog post about this. I didn't, contribute to it, but I know it's got a lot of really good advice in there. So check that out. But essentially what I would say is every bit of content, every link, every line of code can affect your deliverability. So figure the links within your email, if those have a bad reputation because they've been used by some other sender, some other spammer, someone else, that can impact your sender reputation, even if you have a really good domain reputation for the from address that you're using. So that's one aspect here, but I think it's, it comes down to much more than just the actual content. Like there are certain mailbox providers who do not accept emojis. And so figure if you have an emoji in your subject line, it's going to look like a little block, a little dot or something, or perhaps it's not going to be delivered. They're just going to outright reject it. But in most cases, the reason that content matters is because it elicits a reaction from users, right? So going back to what mailbox providers care about, which is, does my recipient like this mail? Do they like it a lot? Are they showing me they like it a lot through their actions, or are they marking it as spam or deleting it or ignoring it, right? So if you have content that gets people to open a lot because it's claiming you get a free thing, but then when they get inside that email, they realize it's with a free purchase, and then they're mad, right? They're like, what? You told me it was free. And so they mark the mail as spam, or they unsubscribe. So they take those negative reactions. And so this is why you need to really monitor all of your metrics over time, because you're just trying to balance that, right? You want to have as many positive reactions as possible. You want to limit the negative reactions, and the content is a great way to get people to engage in the ways that you want. Like, again, going back to those replies that I mentioned, imagine you could have things within your email that say, hey, people, we would love to know your advice on this. We want your feedback on this. And so you're asking them to reply, right? And then if you're replying, you're starting a conversation with your recipients, which is really good for building that brand loyalty that you're looking for over time. But yeah, really the content there are filters that are impacted by it, but it's not as simple as just saying, don't use certain spammy words. It's so much more sophisticated than that. The filters are, they're doing a good job of separating. I mean, even that, if you go and look at your inbox right now, I bet you've got a lot of quote unquote spammy words that have hit your inbox, no problem, because the sender reputation is good behind those brands.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. actually. So the content is also important. And the another thing that I have been noticing is the frequency of email important.
Mhm.
Like how frequently do you send emails to your users? Are you spamming them every day, or are you sending a very thoughtful message in a month? Right. So is that a factor that affects email delivery in the long run?
It does, yes. And this is again because those mailbox providers are looking at engagement. So figure if you
Mm,
send every day or every
mm,
hour or something
mm,
that's way too much and your recipients can't keep up, um, the mailbox providers are going to just see a low level of engagement, or perhaps you're sending
mm,
so much that you're actually making people mad enough to mark your mail as spam, right? So they're looking for those kind of things. If you're over mailing, in other cases, you might be under mailing to the point where imagine if you only send like a quarterly invoice or a quarterly newsletter or something, maybe figure those people that signed up for your mail, if they haven't
mm,
heard from you in 3 months, they might have forgotten who you are or that they signed up, or they're just not engaged. They don't really care about your brand anymore. So
mm,
you really need to look into your data signals. And so that is everything from the opens, the clicks, the
mm,
unsubscribes, and the complaints, all of it. And if you have as well conversion data or website traffic that you can kind of pair with that, that's really, really helpful as well. But essentially you're looking to really pair the frequency with what your audience is doing, right? So if they only seem to care about mail once a week, don't send to
mm,
them daily. Maybe have a separate segment for people that are regular openers every single day versus
mm.
people that they make a purchase once a quarter, but otherwise they don't really care about you. Because I think that's nailing that frequency for the recipient is really important for their experience.
Mm.
But it's also important for those metrics that the mailbox providers are looking at.
Yeah, got it. So another thing that I've heard from various startups is that they
Mhm,
send their first email to thousands of users suddenly, and
mhm.
all of them go to spam and they don't get any open rates, etc. So
Yeah.
is domain warm up or the IP warm up important? And if it is important, how should people do it?
Yeah, it's definitely important. And I think this is where the volume and the engagement of your audience both come into play here. So figure if you're only sending, if your list is so quite small, right? And I'm talking like, let's say if it's 500 people or 1,000 people, you could probably send to all of them on day one because that's a volume that's not kind of too much. It's not going to kind of have a red flag for recipients. But anything really kind of above like 5 to 10,000 on day, like the first day that you're sending, is
Mm,
going, figure mailbox providers are again, they're looking for that 95% of malicious traffic and they want to block it. So they're
mm,
saying, wait a minute, here's mail that's coming from a brand new domain or a brand new IP. We've never seen any activity here. So we're going to assume this might be bad.
mm,
Well, this domain has they're kind of trying to put the pieces together. So if they have no back history to rely on, and then
mm,
they see this really high volume on the first day of sending, either from the IP or from the domain, they flag it as suspicious. They're like, I don't know, that doesn't look good. And so what they're really looking to do, what you want to do is sort of warm up your audience. And so if you can focus on the people that you think are going to open and click and engage very positively first, that's helpful.
mm,
And what mailbox providers are doing is they're watching, right? As you're hitting send and the mail is going into the inbox with recipients, they're looking to see, are they engaging? Are they marking as
mm,
spam? What are they doing? Are they doing anything with it that tells us
mm,
that for the rest of the people that you send to, we should continue to send it to them at the inbox? Or, oh,
mm,
no, it seems like people do not like this. Yep, the rest is going to spam. So it's kind of like you want to send as slowly as possible because you're
mm,
really, it's like you're dipping your toe into the pool of water, right? And you're kind of like, you don't want to just go dive head first and
mm,
kind of shock everybody and splash everybody. It's really just you're warming it up. That's truly what you're trying to do. So I
mm,
think there's a lot of cases where founders, especially, or business owners, you start collecting email addresses, which is awesome, before
mm,
you launch your product or before you launch your service.
mm,
But figure if it's 6 months before they hear from you, if it's a year, if it's 2 years, they don't care anymore, or they don't remember who you are or why they're hearing from you. They don't remember signing up at all. That's going to be bad for your engagement. So
mm,
um, even if you're just getting started, I know you're really busy as a founder, but try to engage with that audience. Like keep those email addresses kind of warmed up, even if it's just
mm,
a pseudo newsletter where you're just saying, hey guys, we're getting closer to launch. I'm really excited. So happy you're on the journey with me, or something that really just gets them going. But yeah, the slower you can go, the better.
mm,
This is good for your deliverability, but I think it's also good for the business because the slower you go, right? If you're transitioning to a new platform or if you're just starting out, you don't you don't want to just blast out and go fast, right? You need to kind of really just gauge the level of interest. Yeah, so that would be my best advice there.
So basically, slowly engage your audience and keep sending like some emails instead of sending one blast at once. That would be the advice here.
Yes.
Yeah. So one last question that I would like to ask Lauren before going to audience question is, a lot of people complain that, hey, this ESP is bad because I'm not getting good open rates, and I'm going to switch to new ESP. So does uh, ESP any ESP can affect the open rate or deliverability, or if that is true, how to decide which ESP to take? What are the factors we should be checking before deciding on one ESP?
Yeah, and so this is a great question because we definitely, every ESP is probably going to claim that they've got really great inbox placement. So it's really hard to kind of take them for their word on that. And when you're going to the spam folder, you're going to look for a new provider, right? So I think note that we were just talking about IP and domain warm up and how mailbox providers are a little bit suspicious of mail that comes from like a new or an unknown area, right? So figure if you're switching providers, if you send through Mailmodo today, and then tomorrow you're going to send through Socketlabs, mailbox providers are going to say, hey, that's a new location. Did they get hacked? Is that actually them? Or is that somebody just trying to pretend to be? So I think that's, again, so anytime you're switching, consider there is going to be a little bit of a dip where your open rates are going to look a little bit worse because mailbox providers are just trying to catch up and understand what you're doing. And that's where the organization as you switch is going to be very helpful so that it's like a very intentional move that mailbox providers can start to understand very quickly. But that's, when you're trying to vet an ESP, it's very hard because again, they're all claiming that their services are great. So it's, look for, do they have first of all, do they have a privacy policy on their website? Do they have a terms and conditions that says at some point we're going to cut you off if you're spamming? Do they even have a published list of what spamming looks like and things like that? And I think from there, there's certain ESPs in this industry that are really well known and they've got tons and tons of customers, but at this point they're kind of so large and they're not really maintaining their sender base as well. There's some issues with spam getting through or fraudsters sending or just low qualities of mail. And so I think that's where like you really need to kind of talk to a mailbox provider and excuse me. You really want to talk to an ESP and figure out, like, do you care about compliance? If I were to make these bad moves, what's going to happen, right? And so I think that's something that you can sort of start to feel as you work with them. If you talk to their support team, do they have answers quickly? Are they able to help you, or are they kind of just giving you the runaround? The ones that tend to have better deliverability really do stay on top of things, right? So if you're getting the runaround, that's not a good sign for your deliverability as well. But I will say, most of deliverability, most of you hitting the inbox is not about your provider. It's about you, because at this point, figure, a lot of ESPs, including Socketlabs, we have shared IP setups, right? So we've got a bunch of different customers all sending from the same shared IPs, but they are using their own domains. And so the fact that mailbox providers are more sophisticated now and they look at domain reputation a lot more than they used to, the IP is less important, right? So I think that's where it really does come down to you, what you're doing, what your recipients or engagement look like, right? Like, are they engaging positively? Are they engaging negatively? Your provider absolutely has a part in that. So if your IP is blacklisted, for example, that's going to be really hard to deliver mail to certain places. And so that's on them to control that and to keep that pool of IPs or your dedicated IP in tip-top shape. And the email infrastructure part comes into this. I touched upon the fact that email delivery, that last mile of delivery, is really complicated. And so figure there's a lot of customization, a lot of tweaking that can kind of happen there. So every ESP is a little bit different, but I think that's where very quickly, if you're having issues and you reach out to support and there's not a clear-cut answer, you might want to just kind of consider if there's an issue with quality on those pools.
Yeah, got it. So again, it is everything that you said earlier, that it is how you send email, how you engage with your recipient, more than the IP or the ESP itself, right? So what are the things that as an email marketer one should uh, focus on or do to make sure that their inboxing is good, their emails are getting placed in the right folder?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think there's a couple of recommendations that I would give here. I would say the first one is get permission before you mail people, right? This is the most important thing to do. I understand that cold email has a place in the world and business has to kind of grow, but anything you can do to actually get someone to opt in to hear from you, that means they're more engaged, they're more interested, they're less likely to mark your mail as spam because they remember signing up, or they know they've heard of you at this point, right? So I think it's really, really important to kind of to get permission. And that's, purchase lists are always going to probably tell you that they're opt in, but they opted into that company, not to your brand, right? So if they hear from your brand and they've never heard of your brand, or they know they didn't sign up directly, they're going to mark it as spam, and that's going to kill your deliverability. So really, really that permission is super duper important. Beyond that, I would say, really align any lead magnets that you have with your signup forms with your actual goals with email, right? If you're trying to drive sales in e-commerce, make sure that you're bringing people in for that purpose, right? Like I think there's, sweepstakes is a good example here of, if you're a tire company and you're offering a free trip to Italy, what's the connection there? Like, right, people are signing up for that free trip to Italy. Do they care about getting emails from your brand about tire sales? No, probably not, right? So I think it's connecting the goals so that you can send content to them that's going to engage them in a way that they want to respond positively, right? Which again is good for deliverability. So so align those lead magnets with your actual goals. The next one is also to properly set expectations with people during that sign up process. So if you want to give some options about frequency or types of mail, if you've got like a couple of different newsletters, maybe give them the option to choose ones that are more interesting to them. Personalization of all types, right? Like, if you are a retail brand, maybe you want to ask if they want male clothing or female clothing or children's clothing or whatever, right? So I think it's getting into that mindset of what people actually care about, and then setting those expectations and then sticking with it, right? If you say I'm going to mail to you weekly, do not start sending daily unless you inform them of that change, because they're going to be like, wait a minute, what's going on? I didn't sign up for this. I don't want this, right? So those expectations are very important. And then you're not done, right? Like, you got their email address. Now you're sending to them, but segmentation and targeting are super important as well. So following those data signals we were talking about earlier, so that if you've got certain kinds of mail that are leading to lots of unsubscribes or spam complaints, key into that and change the content or change the segment that you're sending to. Try to figure out why are these people that I thought are going to love this piece of content, why are they marking as spam? That's weird, right? So there's got to be some kind of problem, issue there. So really try to focus in on sending to the right kind of people at the right frequency as best you can. And that's really hard to judge, but I think it's definitely important to kind of keep at the top of your mind. And then I would say on the way out, make the unsubscribe process really easy, right? Unsubscribes do not hurt your deliverability. They're actually kind of a good thing. Make it easy. Put it at the top of your email, but don't hide it. Don't put it in a really small font. If they want to get off the ride, just let them get off the ride, right? Focus on the people that actually still want to be there. And then, beyond that, not just the unsubscribes, but have some sort of sunset policy or some sort of policy in place that tells you when you're going to stop mailing to someone. And this doesn't have to be as simple. It's not easy to just say, if they haven't opened the email in 6 months, stop sending, but try to use what signals you have. So if you do have purchase data, maybe you realize that Lauren only makes a purchase every 6 months around the time of her spouse's birthday, right? So I think that's, try to lean into the data you have, get into the mindsets of the different customer profiles, and then, try to align that, right? So for example, if you're a car dealer, your sunset policy, you're going to keep those people on your list for a very long time, but you need to get creative with how you're going to stay in contact, because you can't just contact them every 5 years to say, hey, did you want to buy another new car? Are you ready yet? Like you need to kind of send emails that are relevant to the experience they have with their current car or something like that, right? Like keep yourself top of mind, but do it in the right way. Versus if you're a real estate company and you're sending people 5 emails a day about new homes they could purchase, you kind of figure they're probably going to purchase a home at some point, right? So you don't keep sending that high frequency without any sign of life from the recipient. So I think that's probably my last tip for you, is just really focus in on the data. Remember that deliverability is a moving target, just like recipient interest, right? So what I care about today, maybe I don't care about tomorrow. So following the data signals is really, really powerful. And will just help, you're going to see that signal of, I think my deliverability is getting worse before you get hardcore blocked, right? Gmail especially they put mail in the spam folder for a very long time unless you really do something to upset them. So catch that, notice it, follow your open rates, notice that they're going down at Gmail over time, do something about that, figure out that problem, work with your ESP, ask your favorite deliverability person, whoever you know, what's going on here? Does this look okay? Or is this a problem? Because I think it's, deliverability gets very complex. You folks do not need to know all of it, but you need to have somebody in your life that is accountable to watching that data and making sure that you're still hitting the inbox. Because it's easier to clean up those problems before they get really tough. Once you're really going to spam and you're like, oh no, my mailing list is a mess. Like, that's a lot to clean up. That's going to take a lot of time, and your business is going to be very impatient while you try to clean that up. So do your best to stay ahead of it.
Yeah. So briefly saying, understand and care for your users.
Yes.
That's the most important thing.
You got
Avoid
it.
going to spam. Yeah. So thanks, Lauren. And I am done with my questions. I'm going to take the questions from the audience. So the first question is by Harsh Khatri, who asks how much role the protocol IMAP or POP plays in email's deliverability angle of an email.
Yeah, quite honestly, not a ton. That it's more like I would almost bucket this into the infrastructure part. So kind of similar to like the authentication. It's like you want to make sure that your infrastructure is set up in a way that's going to allow you to successfully deliver your messages and have that organizational structure that looks nice and clear. So whether you're using IMAP or POP, doesn't really matter in the sense of getting it delivered, as long as kind of everything behind that is sort of in order, if you will.
Got it. So I have another question. How to check the spam complaints rate?
So this one usually is directly within your ESP. So if you're using a mailing platform or a marketing automation platform or something like that, usually directly within your dashboard, there should be, you should see the opens and the clicks and the delivery rates, as well as unsubscribes and some spam complaints. So if you don't see that, check with your ESP. Sometimes it's a little bit buried for who knows what reason, technical reasons, whatever else. But yeah, it can be a little bit difficult to get it. If you're using an internal mailing platform, it gets a little bit more complicated because you actually need to go set up all of the feedback loops that are going to connect you to all that spam complaint data. So depends on what you're using, SS. I'm not really sure, but maybe check if you're using an internal platform. Maybe talk to me afterwards. Yeah, we'll get into that.
Yeah. So another question by Harsh actually. So where he basically asked like, how does he actually know that his experiments are working in his favor? Whether,
Yeah, I would say for this one, Harsh, I think it's, first of all, make sure that whatever test you're running is statistically significant, right? Like if you've got a list of 1,000 people and you're doing an A/B test, like that's a pretty small sample size overall. So make sure that whatever results you're doing are running for long enough, or it's a big enough sample size that it means something. Because it's like, okay, well, if you send to 100 people and 50 of them, well, let's say 45 choose this open rate or subject line and 55 choose this, it doesn't really make a difference. So make sure that whatever you're doing is, big enough sample to be statistically significant. But then also try not to change too much. Like, I think it's, be intentional with the tests that you're running and make sure that there's a notable difference. And, don't change, don't test the open rate. Oh, excuse me. Sorry. Don't test the subject line as well as the click, the call to action that you're using and the design within the template, because you're not going to know which one actually made the difference. So just focus on trying to do one test at a time with a big sample.
Yeah, that's a good advice. So another question is by Rahul. He asked like, what advice do you have for sales team or SDR teams whose main job is to bring leads via cold emails?
I know I'm not allowed to say don't do it because that's not helpful here, but I would say anything you can do to not send a cold email is so incredibly helpful. So I know that's really hard when you're a salesperson and you've got all these numbers and you're just meant to have a lot of outreach. But I've had a ton of success with, like, personally with like engaging people on LinkedIn. And I'm not talking about doing network, don't just request to connect with them and then give them a cold pitch via LinkedIn versus email. That's not what we're talking about. It's more, commenting on people's posts, engaging with them via social channels. Maybe even at that point, if you note, and that's like, you need to understand the people that you're sending to, right? So look at their profile, look at the things that they talk about. What did they comment on? What's going on their blog? What's happening in their company? And then come to them. Like, there's one person and I know what they're doing. I know that they're pitching to me, but they're being really helpful, right? It's that seek to serve mentality of, hey, I saw that you're doing this thing. I thought this article might be really interesting for you. Hope you're having a good day. See you later. And so it's more just you're building a relationship as opposed to just saying, hi, cold email here. All about me. Can I have 15 minutes of your time? Like, the point is, why should I care about you reaching out to me? Why should I care at all about your business or the content you're sending me or the time that you're asking for me? Because you're asking for something, right? Even if it's just 3 minutes of attention. So it's find a way to be relevant in their life first. And you can do some of this through, if you have gated content on your website, figure that could be, everybody hates gated content, including me, but you're getting them to sign up first. So they're saying, okay, I really want that guide you created. So fine, here's my email address. I know you're going to follow up with me via email later, but you've started like a warm relationship with them, as opposed to one where you just are a cold salesperson who's knocking on their door constantly. And we know you're going to follow up 5 times, and I'm going to eventually mark you as spam or get really mad and blog about it or something. Like, you don't want to piss people off, I guess is my point. So anything you can do to avoid that cold email, or if you're sending a cold email, make it incredibly relevant, incredibly targeted for that person. Don't just come and talk about the college I went to, or, don't talk about, oh, I see that person gave you a recommendation. That's great. Like, okay, thank you for stroking my ego, but I actually just need you to be valuable to me in some way. Find a way to be valuable, seek to serve.
So basically, be helpful and just don't be a random sales guy. And Rahul has another question here, which seems to be related. Like, is it okay for an ESP to tell the customer what to do and what not to do? Like, you should not be sending cold emails.
Yeah. So I personally think it's okay for an ESP to tell customers what to do. But the question is, do you as the customer care? Are you going to listen to them? So I think that the key is being persuasive, making a compelling case, and hopefully a data-driven case that says, hey, I know you think that you're doing everything right and your mail should be going to the inbox, but I have data that proves that you're going to the spam folder at these destinations. And here's what I can tell you about what matters with Gmail, right? You're going to the spam folder with Gmail. Let me tell you what that means. And so I think it's, with certain ESPs, they're going to just give you best practice advice. There's, even mailbox providers like Hotmail is famous for just giving you canned templates that have the same 3 or 4 or 5 recommendations. And those are not really relevant to you. But if you work with an ESP like Socketlabs, where we care about our customers, our support team is awesome, and they work with our deliverability experts on issues in that sense. So if we're coming to you with a recommendation, it's been vetted, it's specific, it's custom to you, and it's meant to help you. We're not here to be police or to slow you down or to hurt your business. We're here to enable your business. And so if your ESP is just spitting recommendations at you and you're not buying it, it could be just that they're not being persuasive enough. It could be that they're giving you kind of just canned advice that's just not really helpful. So that's sort of on you to kind of figure out the difference. But in my mind, it's okay to tell people don't do that. But in certain cases, I know specifically with cold email, my business does not allow cold email. So if we find out that you're sending cold email from our platform, it's not a recommendation. It's stop doing it, or your account is canceled. You're terminated. So I think it's finding the line between what's recommendation and what's a requirement based on their terms of service.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Surya has a very interesting question. Have you seen a correlation between the throughput, number of SMTP connections, and deliverability?
I have, yes. And this is one of those beautiful things where there are millions of different mailbox providers, millions of destinations you're sending to, and all of them decide their own throughput. So there's certain cases where they'll allow pretty much just anything. There's certain providers where they require a certain number of once you exceed a certain number of concurrent connections. So imagine it kind of like an octopus, right? Like, instead of having 2 arms, you've got 8 arms that are all connecting and trying to deliver mail. So I think you have to kind of dig into the very specific destination that maybe you're having a problem with. And in some cases, a lot of times you can just reach out to that mailbox provider. Your ESP can definitely help with this. They may already know or have automations or things in place to kind of help with that. But if you're doing it on your own, reaching out to that mailbox provider and saying, hey, it seems like we're getting blocked, but we're doing everything right. We're sending opt-in, we're doing all of these things. They may come back and say, you're sending too fast, or you're sending with too many concurrent connections. Again, just too many machines from your side attacking their side and taking too many resources. So it does impact things. Same thing. There's let's say if you're getting a soft bounce where the mailbox provider says, try again later, we're busy, there's not enough resources, just try again later. If you keep pounding them and pounding them and pounding them versus just kind of taking a little while to take a step back. Like if they're saying we're too busy, try again later, don't try again right away, try again later, right? So I think that's like our platform at Socketlabs, we have very highly maintained to kind of already have custom rules in place for all of the different destinations. But if you're using your own internal provider, or if you've got an ESP that's not kind of as buttoned up, you may see some issues with throughput.
Got it. Yeah. So another great question, like if we somehow figure out that emails are going to spam, what should we do?
I don't want to say pause your email program and stop everything, but take a breath, take a step back and look at your data, try to figure out what's going on. So I think some questions to ask are kind of like, how do we identify this issue? So is it that you're seeing that your delivery rate is just completely at the floor, like it's terrible? Is it just a complaint from one of your customers who's saying the mail went to the spam folder? Is it a mailbox provider that's blocking you? Right? Like what's the data signal that you realize? Like, well, and I guess we're talking about spam folder here, but what are the signals that you're looking at? Right? Like let's say if you have a 30% open rate at all the destinations you send to, but you notice that Hotmail is at like 6%, that's a good sign that there's a spam folder issue. So it's getting the data to say, here's where my problems are. I'm only going to spam at Hotmail. Let's talk about that. What does Hotmail care about? How can we fix that? Versus if you're going to spam at all of the destinations you send to, that's probably something more related to your data quality or the sender reputation that you have. So it's really just looking at those signals. But the what you don't want to do if you realize you're going to spam is just keep cramming more and more email of the same kind down that mailbox provider's throat. So just kind of pump the brakes a little bit, right? Like slow yourself down. Maybe just focus on your more engaged segments and kind of like drop some of the people that haven't really been opening or clicking or doing anything. Really dig into your spam complaint rates. And so look back, did you notice your spam folder issue starting today? Or if you're looking back through your data, do you see that there's kind of been a slow decline in your open rates or a slow increase in your spam complaint rates? Or is it that you dropped off a cliff one day? So I think it's looking at the signals in the data. And then if you can pinpoint when you start to see the problem happening, then you can say, what did we do right before that? Did we make any changes to segmentation or data collection? Or did we run a promo that was a little bit more aggressive than that? So it really is kind of just you need to figure out the source of that problem and then go fix it. And sometimes that is a data quality problem. Sometimes it's just frequency and targeting, but it really is pumping the brakes. Don't just expect it to be fixed tomorrow and then go back to business. You need to take that signal that something's wrong and actually fix it, right? Like if your house is on fire, don't just put it out and then expect another fire tomorrow, right? Like fix the leaky thing that keeps causing fires every single day, right? So yeah.
Yeah. Another question by Kirti. What is that one blog which I should follow to keep me updated about email delivery?
Well, I'm going to say the Socketlabs blog because that's my blog and that's where I write. But yeah, no, I would. I think I'm going to give Kickbox a plug here because the woman who replaced me when I left about a year ago, Jennifer Nespola-Lance, is incredibly brilliant. She has about, I think, 15 years of experience from Zeta, a previous ESP. She just knows her stuff. And so the Kickbox blog and also Al Iverson from Spam Resources now with their team as well. And so they've got two different series where they're kind of running. That they get basically like contributions from different experts in the industry. So you figure you've got a question every month, and then there's 5 to 10 people that chime in and give you advice from their perspective, which is really cool. But then Jen's also been working on this series of just tons of content. So she actually is putting out right now, I think, a 5-part series that's all about authentication. So for anybody who was asking about authentication earlier, you can go check that out. It starts very simple of just why is authentication matter and what are you doing? And then it gets very technical. So I would say that's one blog that I'm constantly impressed by the content that she's putting out.
I would also like to
Chad S. White from Oracle. He's brilliant too. So if you don't know of Chad S. White, check him out as well.
Yeah, I would also like to plug Mail Modu blog. Our team is also writing a lot of content, and we are producing and talking with people like Lauren Mayer to bring this content to you.
Mhm.
So, since we are almost 1 hour, I will take one last question, Lauren, and it is
Mhm.
like from Jacob. Like with regard to email marketing, what are your thoughts on AMP email being the future?
Yeah. I think it's really exciting. I feel like, and Akbar, I bet you know even more about this than I do, since I know your platform really supports this. But I think this is it's there's the challenge of AMP being complicated, more complicated than a typical email to send. Right? There's more
Yeah.
steps involved. There's just more to do. So I think it's
Mm,
if you're a really small team, that
mm,
can be really hard to keep up with. It's a lot of work. And so like Mailmodo is making it easier to use AMP for email. So I think that's wonderful. But
mm,
I do see it as the future because you can do all of these wonderful interactive things directly within the email. So instead of having
mm,
to just include a bunch of links and say, go check out my blog or whatever,
mm.
you can make purchases directly with email. You can
Yeah.
run little games that help boost engagement, which is great for email. There's just all these things that you can do that
Mm.
really just kind of help solidify your brand's recognition with people, and it just kind of makes email more fun, if you will. I don't know, Aquabear, anything to add on that since this is super close to your world?
Yeah, so definitely, like we made Mail Modo with this vision that AMP is going to be the future of email marketing, and like you mentioned that we can do a lot of things like shopping, gaming, and making emails more engaging actually. And one of the factors that you mentioned that like care for your users and make user engage with your email. Uh,
Mhm.
that is being the most important part of email, good emails, right? So AMP enables you to do that actually, that you can help your user engage with the emails directly directly then and there itself, without having to go to them to go to a website to take the action, right?
Yeah.
So definitely, I also believe that this is the future of email. So, being said that, Lauren, thank you for your time, and we learned a lot, and I think the audience was very excited today, and they asked a lot of questions. So, thanks a lot for joining us today, and
Yeah.
yeah, and we'll keep seeing your post, and we wish you best of the luck to do more good for the email whole email industry.
Sounds good. Yeah. Thanks for having me. And thanks to all of you who joined us. It's really fun chatting.
Yeah, thank you.